Good afternoon. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for being with us today. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you so much for being here as well. Today, we have the pleasure of introducing Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Sea Grant and Cape Cod's Cooperative Extension's coastal experts, Shelly McComb and Bryan McCormack, for an insightful discussion on the past, present, and future of our ever-changing coastline. In this talk, we will learn the history of Cape Cod's formation from the Ice Age to present day, how erosion impacts your home, beach, and community, and what climate change means for Cape Cod's future, and ways to adapt and build community resilience. So without further ado, Bryan McCormack.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Happy to have you all out here today. And I am the Coastal Processes Specialist. Going to go up a little bit. Okay. Oh, hey, everyone on Zoom. Sorry about that. But I am the Coastal Processes Specialist with that very long two entities that I will not repeat. And I want to today try to give you guys a little bit of background on kind of what is going on with all the sand. I know you guys are probably curious, and I made a whole career around it, so obviously I'm pretty curious too. And so we're going to start with some glacial geology, what we looked like way back when, how Cape Cod was formed, move into some climate change stuff so that we have a better understanding of what's happened with past climate and also future climate. Then move into the coastal processes, kind of what all that means for the sand that's around us, and then tie that into the Wetlands Protection Act, which is that's the regulations that you got to worry about when you want to try to protect your home. If you've done any kind of project at your home on the beach, you've probably run into this before, and you know it gets pretty complicated. Then I want to give you guys some tools that you can use so that you know a little bit more, you can find more information and tie more things together so that you can make an informed decision on anything you're seeing on the beach. So we start about 23,000 years ago with the Laurentide ice sheet. And this was essentially a massive ice cube that was sitting above us. And at some points, it was 2 miles thick. This is a ton of ice. And all of that ice acts as a plow, and it pushes all of the sediment out in front of it, and it picks some of it up, and it starts to move it around and bring it basically wherever it wants. Luckily for us, it was brought down to us here on the Cape and Islands, and then Earth's climate starts to change on its own. It goes through cycles, and it began to melt. So 18,000 years ago, we saw that ice sheet start to push way back and leave the moraines that we see today that form Cape and Islands. Fun fact, if you drove on 6 to get here from Falmouth, Sandwich, anywhere that direction, you were actually driving up on that moraine. That's kind of the high point, and it's where we typically like to build our major highways so that they're a little more resilient to some of the things we'll see today. And this is another view of that same kind of thing. You can see just kind of that scale of the ice sheet. And it leaves behind a lot of markers in geologic features that we can pull out, like those moraines, outwashed plains. A lot of our ponds are actually kettle ponds. Those are glacial features. And with that ice melting, sea levels start to come up. And so 11,000 years ago, George's Bank that we think of as, you know, shallow out there, great for fishing, that was actually dry land. There were people living out there. A lot of the native people that were here were out on George's Bank. And so there are archaeological sites out there that are now completely submerged. And these climate cycles that kind of caused all this, well, there's a guy named Milutin Milankovitch back in late 1800s, early 1900s, forget the exact year, but he was very curious as to why this was going on, why we were seeing all these large scale changes, glaciers come out, glaciers go back. This is a cycle that has been going on for millions of years. And he tracked it back to the eccentricity of Earth's orbit, which basically means that we're floating around the sun, but it's not a perfect circle. And it doesn't always stay at the same exact distance. So it's sometimes a little more like an egg, sometimes a little more like a circle, but it happens in about 100,000 year cycle. So very long, like geologic timescales with some of these things. We also have axial precession, where planet is actually like an unbalanced top as we're spinning around. So we're going around kind of the center line, but we're also wobbling at the same time. And that wobble starts to tilt out a little more, tilt back in. And all of these come together to explain a lot of the glacial cycles that we've seen in Earth's past. And one of the things that happens is all of that ice, like I said, it's massive. At some points, 2 miles of ice. And that actually starts to deform the Earth beneath it. So the crust of the Earth, it's pretty crusty. And the mantle underneath is usually what we call ductile. It's kind of gooey. And so we actually weigh down the planet and shift how it's forming. But as that ice melts back and all of that weight is taken off, it starts to spring back in something we call isostatic rebound. And so this is one of the things that plays into what we see today in terms of sea level rise and our, geologic features that are pretty strange. We also can calculate the gravitational, no, I'm just kidding. But all of that ice being that massive, it comes with a lot of gravity too. And it actually pulls on the water that's closest to it to form kind of like a bulge. And as it starts to melt out, there's not as much mass, so that water bulge begins to flatten out, become more evenly distributed. And then we started tracking it. And so this is a photo from back in 2014. This is up in Canada, and this is 2024. So as many of you probably know, we are losing a lot of ice, and we're losing it fairly quickly. We also have thermal expansion. And so all of the little molecules in water, as we add heat energy to the oceans, those molecules start bouncing around faster and faster. And what ends up happening is they like to have more space. It's like if you pack people into a room and then you try to tell them to run a race around the room, they all start bumping in, probably going to get pretty tight in there. So as these things are bouncing around and trying to find more space, they take the path of least resistance, which is up. And so the thermal expansion is a major contributor to the sea level rise that we see today. And those are kind of the big two. It's the ice melt that's adding water to the oceans and that thermal expansion. And that all comes from the warming that is in large part because of us. All of the greenhouse gases that we emit, they warm the atmosphere. The atmosphere is warming the ocean. And that's causing a lot of sea level rise. And humans are pretty curious. They, like to figure out how things work. And so we started measuring it. And this is data from Boston between 1970 and what does it go up to? 2024. So this year. So you can see that bold red line. That's data up until, what is that, June? And from 1970 until today, sea level has risen about 8 inches. And you think, okay, about that much. It's a lot, but it doesn't seem all that catastrophic. We have 10-foot tides in Cape Cod Bay. What is another 8 inches going to do? Problem is the Earth had a long time to kind of work these formations relative to that sea level. Now we're adding a shock to the system by sending it up even quicker. And so we're pretty flat. We're not Colorado with the Rockies. We're, you can see pretty much anywhere if you go up, 100 feet. So this ends up being catastrophic for a lot of the places. And I'm sure you guys have already seen that. And it's projected to get worse. these are things that we have set in motion that we can't just flip a switch and turn off. And of course, it's a lot of economics, it's a lot of science, it's everything we do that plays into how we approach climate change. But as it is right now, all of these projections show that between 2100 and 2000 and 2100, going the wrong way, we're looking at about 3.9 feet of sea level rise in our region. And so that 8 inches, it's going to get a lot faster and it's going to get a lot higher. And we want to try and stop it. But solutions like this don't necessarily work. They may in the short term, but in the long term, those are 36-inch doors. We have 3 feet of sea level rise. So even if you had a wall of doors like that, we're still going to go above it. And this also gives you some scale of how high that water will start to get. You turn that door sideways, still going to go above it. And that thermal expansion, that's heat energy in the water, that plays into something else. And it's a lot of the storms that we see. And as you definitely have seen, these storms, the hurricanes that come through, they're not good. They're impacting tons of communities all around the globe. Maybe not us directly this year, but if you were here for Bob, then you've definitely seen this. And what fuels hurricanes? It's the heat. So the more heat we put in, the stronger these storms can get. And we base the strength off the Saffir-Simpson scale. And this is based primarily on wind speed. And I get the question sometimes of, well, storms, we're adding heat, they're getting stronger. Why don't we have a category 6? Because category 4 is catastrophic damage. Category 5, yeah, your entire neighborhood could be gone. And we've seen this. New Jersey coast with Sandy, Katrina. Yep, it happened just this year. Entire neighborhoods can get washed out to the point where you may not be able to get back there for weeks, months. And so we don't necessarily need a category 6 because we're kind of already there. But another factor to these storms is the storm surge. We base the category off the wind speed, but all of that wind is pushing a lot of water along with it. And so you see the tidal predictions here in blue, and then that green line is what we actually observed. That's feet of water because of a storm. And that starts to give us some insight into what that sea level will start to look like. So you think 3.9 feet of sea level rise out to 2100. Well, that's like having one of the worst storms we've seen at high tide. Maybe not the wind, but that water level is getting to about that same point. And nor'easters, as you guys probably know, they're not much better. These storms are hitting us really hard. And we're working to find ways to protect our homes, to protect ourselves. The homeowner's handbook is a great way to start to dive into that for yourself. And for those of you on Zoom, we got homeowners handbooks here, but you can also find them on our website. And I think Shelly's going to cover that in a little more detail than me. And you can also find resources like this on our website where you can learn a little bit more about the differences between hurricanes and nor'easters. They have different formations, different scales, but unfortunately I can't ramble too long today, so I can't go in too far. But we have climate projections for storms too. And we may not necessarily see more of them, but we are expected to have more powerful storms and they're going to last longer. And so when we look at that storm surge that's going through multiple tidal cycles, that's going to happen more and more. Not just a quick hit where you have a storm come through overnight and you go clean up in the morning. It could be a couple days worth of storm that you have to hunker down or even get out of the way. So to the fun part, what does all this mean for the sands? Well, I want you to try to think of the beach as a system. You have all these different parts that are kind of playing off each other, working together. So you have of course, the sediment, all the sand, and not necessarily sand, but we'll get into that in just a moment. But you have the sediment, and then you have all of that water, and of course, wind. And these start to play together where you have more wind, it can push up more water, and that can move more sediment. And we start seeing erosion. We start seeing formation of dunes. We start seeing all of these things play together to build what we see today on our shorelines. And all of that sand, it starts to move. So what we call littoral transport, that's that sand shifting around because the waves aren't coming in at, perfectly perpendicular angle. Sorry, parallel angle. They're coming in at slightly different angles, and they start to push the sand in different directions. And so that's how we have a lot of the formations that we see of Provincetown, Monomoy, Sandy Neck. That's those coastal processes that are coming into play, that wind, the waves, that's moving all of this sand. And so that gives you a little bit of scale for how these things work. So was it, I think 3,000 or 3,000 years ago. Sorry, I got it covered up here. But Sandy Neck was not what we see today. It was just kind of a chunk hanging out there. But as more sediment was coming down through Cape Cod Bay up from the Plymouth area, and the waves were acting on that sand, it starts to stretch it out into a barrier spit. And that's still going on today. This is still happening, although there's some infrastructure that gets in the way. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. And here's some actual data, not just the graphic. What you see here is a Truro Provincetown line where we have ladder elevation. So fly a plane with a laser in it that's taken the elevation of the ground beneath it. And this is what you see. And so the red is really high elevation, about 96 feet. Those blues start to get much lower, down to about, sea level, sometimes even a little bit below that on this. And what you see is what was formed through the wind, the waves, the littoral transport, those coastal processes, and the glacial formations. So again, go back to that ice. It has a lot of power behind it. It took a couple 100 feet, and this is even with some rainfall erosion, some wind erosion, kind of tamped it down a little bit. But you can see where the ice dumped all this sediment, and then all of these processes began to start to shape it into what we see today. And it happens on much shorter time scales too. Seasonality. Sure, plenty of you have gone out in the winter and said, wow, it's, really rocky beach. I would not want to sit here in the summer. And then you come back in the summer and you're like, I am definitely sitting here for the day. No one has taken my spot, throwing up the umbrella and trying to enjoy the day. But that's because we have different energy regimes. So in the winter, that's when we start to have the nor'easters, the powerful storms. All of that energy is starting to pick up those sand grains and move it, typically into offshore bars, sometimes through the littoral cell, that system that's all the sand moving. And then summer waves come in, they're a little bit more gentle, a little bit lower, and they'll start to build that beach back up because the sand is getting a slightly gentler push. And I mentioned that not all the beaches are sand. You have summer beaches, winter beaches. Well, there's a guy back in 1922 that wanted to classify all these different, grains of sediment, and his name was Wentworth. And so when we say sand, that has a pretty well-defined region. And so it goes from very fine sand up to very coarse sand, but you also have pebbles, silt, clay, and obviously a beach doesn't necessarily have to be just one of these, but what you see can tell you a lot about the energy regime that's going on with that beach. So finer grain particles are typically much easier to move. If you think, you pick up a baseball, it's pretty easy. If you try to pick up a car, it's going to be a little bit tougher. And that's kind of what you see here. So it takes more energy to move larger things. And that last column there, well, we wanted to actually quantify that. Again, humans were pretty curious. We like to figure things out and, see how they actually work. And so not too long after that, a guy by the name of Hillstrom, he actually figured out how fast that water has to move to pick up different sediments and either move them, take them away completely, or have them drop out of suspension and become deposition. And I've mentioned it a lot. This comes down to the energy. And that energy is transferred by the waves. We have two kinds of waves that we dive into. One is deep water waves, and that's where the wind is blowing across the surface of the water, and it's transferring some of that energy because of friction. As that energy is being pushed in, it's getting through the water column, but there's internal friction in that water column too, and that starts to dissipate out that energy. So if that energy gets to functionally zero within the water column without hitting anything beneath it, it's a deep water wave. But our big problem comes with the shallow water waves. That's where that energy starts to actually hit the seabed underneath it. And when that happens, we start to see movement of sediment. And starts to lead to things like this. And like this. So the sand, it wants to move. It's been moving for a very long time, but we put our homes, our lives on beaches, and we really want them to stay where they are. The problem is Mother Nature's kind of working against us there and doesn't want the beach to stay where it is. So we started putting stuff in, things like revetments, groins, jetties, but those come with their own set of problems. And so we wanted to try to mitigate some of those problems, and we brought in the Wetlands Protection Act. And this is something that if you want to do pretty much anything on the coastline, you're going to run into this. And it covers all of your coastal beaches, marshes, banks, dunes, all those features that you see on the beach. This is going to cover them. And it came into effect on August 10th, 1978. And so if your house was built before that date, you're going to be able to do things that you can't do after that, because we started to see that a lot of these things cause problems that weren't great for maybe your property or your neighbor's property or the entire stretch of beach going down from you. Luckily, we have what we refer to as the coastal manual. It's takes all the laws. I'm not a lawyer. I don't think I want to be a lawyer. I like being a scientist. It's a little more fun, but it takes all those laws and kind of gives you context for what they mean, what you can do with them, and kind of how they play out in the real world. Unfortunately, the entirety of the Wetlands Protection Act is like 250-ish pages, and that covers not just the coastal stuff, but the upland, inland stuff too. The coastal manual is like 330 pages, so it's a lot of detail and it covers a lot of stuff, but it gives you a lot of context for what the Wetlands Protection Act really means. And luckily for us here, if you're doing anything, you're going to end up working with your local conservation commission, and they sometimes call me to come in and help out with a project, give some insight into what's going on, and help figure out what we can do and what maybe we shouldn't be doing in front of our homes. But when we do things, we have revetments, gabion, core. These are some of the things that we put in place to try and hold that sand in front of our house. And each one has its pros and cons. Some of the hard structures, they start to reflect more of the energy, and they might have worse effects on the ends, but they might help the sand that's underneath your house stay there a little bit more. Softer solutions, like you see on the right, a lot of those fiber rolls, the big envelopes that you see, those are softer solutions that may not have some of the same impacts as those big, heavy coastal engineering structures, but again, they come with their own set of problems.
Gabion is this approximate wire gauge.
Essentially, yes. Yep. Yeah, sorry, I tried to get the full scale of Yep, a lot of it is coconut fiber husk. You'll see burlap that's rolled out, and it takes slightly different forms. But that's actually great question for me to plug the spectrum of coastal erosion control methodology. You can find that up here, and for those on Zoom, you can find it on our website as well. That'll run you through all of the different options that are kind of out there right now, most of the big ones. And it gives you a little detail about, everything from do nothing and let the system do what it wants, all the way to the heavy solutions like the revetments, seawalls, jetties, and grab one here or on the website. But like I said, these come with their own set of problems. And so the sediment is trying to move this way, but we put something in the way. We said, no, we don't want you going there. And now this side, it may not be super happy. If you live on this side, you might think it's great, but your neighbor on that side, they might not be super happy with you. And so that's why we need these regulations to make sure that we're doing the right thing. It's not to stop you from protecting your house. It's to make sure that we're working with the system so that we don't have adverse impacts that we really didn't intend to. And those soft solutions, they have their own problem. A lot of them are biodegradable, and that's great because, putting things where they don't belong is kind of the hallmark of humanity. But things like this, they break down. And so they might last a year if you get hit with a really big storm. They might last a decade. If they do, you may have put them in the wrong spot, but eventually these things are meant to go away. It's not a permanent protection. It's not going to last forever. And that's because we want to keep working with the natural systems. That's kind of our best bet for trying to protect not only ourselves, but everybody else around us as well. And when you throw one of these things in, whether it be the hard structure or a soft solution, you're probably going to have nourishment requirements because, like I said, we want to keep that system being as natural as possible, and those things stop it. So we want to add that sediment back in so that we have that littoral transport. Your neighbor's still getting the sediment that they naturally would to protect their house. And we get it from things like upland sand mining, dredging, and we want to use compatible sediments. So if you have a medium sand beach and say, oh, well, we're going to bring in a bunch of cobbles, that doesn't really work very well because you're still shifting that energy regime around and not maintaining the natural system. And a lot of these are persistent. So if you're looking to buy a house and there's something already in place, you're very likely going to have to continue that nourishment, even if you didn't put it in. The only solution to kind of get out of that is to take it out. But then you have to weigh the pros and cons of the protection of your home versus how much you spend on nourishment. Because sand, as I'm sure some of you know, is very expensive. Some people spend thousands of dollars a year to bring in sand so that they can meet the requirements for having one of these solutions in place. Also, another plug for our beach nourishment guide for homeowners on our website. If you do have nourishment that you're bringing in, this is probably pretty helpful to you. So yeah, feel free to check it out and ping me with any questions. But we're not going to fool Mother Nature. That's kind of the long and short of this. There are things that are changing, and we have to try to work with them because a lot of that energy that we talked about, it's redirected. It's either reflected or refracted around these things that we put in place. And if we try to stop that, we're typically going to make it worse somewhere else. And so it's kind of a balancing act of what we can do and what we should do. But the more we can create slow dissipation of energy rather than an abrupt hard stop up against the wall, that's kind of what Mother Nature intended. And so we can work with Mother Nature. Things like bringing in more sand for nourishment, even if it is expensive. And I know a lot of people, they bring in sand one storm comes through and they go, it's gone. It's not doing anything for me now. That sand is still helping you out. Mother Nature has taken it and evenly distributed it through the system so that it has the impact that it's supposed to. You want to try to maintain what we call an equilibrium beach profile. Don't have too much time to get into that today, but that's something that's how Mother Nature intended. And so when you pile up sand on the beach, it's might go away, but it's still playing its role in the system. And all the vegetation, well, that helps a lot too. A lot of these plants that you see on the coastline, all your dune grass, your spartina, they've adapted to these coastal settings so that they can hold on to that sand with their roots and then withstand a lot of the storms that come through. And same thing with this. A lot of people, they'll go and plant a lot of beach grass out there and a storm will come through and rip a lot of it out. And they say, well, that was for nothing. But well-rooted dune grass, that is going to hold on to that sediment. And the problem is we can't really compare what would happen if it was and wasn't there. But I can promise you, it's doing a lot to stop that wave energy. But I've kind of thrown a lot at you guys. So how do you make better decisions? And I'm sure there's a way that we can make sure that everyone gets these slides so that you can go to some of these resources and look at things like erosion rates, where floodwater is going to get to, what is sea level rise going to look like, and how can I track that out for year X? And some of these are a little more advanced too. So if you're working through this or you have a little more technical knowledge, you can go find things like that LiDAR that I showed of the Provincetown Truro area. And you can see kind of what that looks like for your house, your neighborhood, your neighbors. And hopefully this gives you a lot of insight into making better decisions about what you do for your property, what you do on the beach, and how you can protect your home. And with that, I actually think we're going to hold off on questions until the end. And I also feel bad. I got one more. I feel bad that I'm very often doom and gloom. So I add in a picture of my girlfriend's three-legged cat with no tail, just to hopefully add a little more happiness into this. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shelly McComb, and we're going to be around for a while after. So any questions that you have from my talk, we can tackle all of them right at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for being here on a Saturday. And I never know how I can go after Bryan because oh, okay, I'm gonna pull it. I know I'm much shorter than him. You guys hear me? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Shelly McComb. I am the Coastal Resilience Specialist at the very long acronym names below, but you get the point. It's great that I get to work in Woods Hole and I get to work for Barnstable County. And sometimes we get to go on the islands too. So I'm gonna kind of give you guys a crash course in like storm preparedness, grant money, like a whole bunch of different things. And then we can talk later if you have any questions, because I'm gonna throw a lot at you in a really quick amount of time. I think Bryan already set the stage really well, talking about what things are happening outside. This is a picture of the Outer Banks. I am from the Southeast, so the Outer Banks are very close to me, but we don't want to look like that. So you guys being here and paying attention and learning about these things is the first step that you don't end up like that. So on that fun note, again, Bryan already talked about this a little bit. This is a lot of numbers up here. I stole this information from my colleague, Greg Berman. What all of this means is that there's some like high water marks, but the previous storm of record was set, like the highest high water mark was set in the blizzard of 1978. Was anyone here remember that? It was that, oh gosh, yeah. So the previous record that stood for 40 years was broken in 2018 during nor'easters Nemo and Grayson. And we can contribute that excess water level to the 6 inches or so of sea level rise we saw since then. So if we hadn't seen that sea level rise, the water wouldn't have been as high, essentially. It was what all of this crazy numbers mean. If you guys want a copy of my slides, there's also a ton of data in here. I love playing around with NOAA's sea level rise viewer. As you can see, there's like marsh migration, high tide flooding. There's a ton of other data on here. I think we can click on this, but I don't want to mess up the Zoom thing. But if you have any questions or want me to like zoom in on your neighborhood, I'm happy to go over that with you. But this is just a great resource just to kind of figure out what's going on around you. I gotta throw in something funny here before we shift gears. Talking about preparedness, we know that winter is coming and we want to be prepared. So there's a link at the bottom to the homeowner's handbook. I think you guys should have grabbed one of those. But basically that just goes over how to reinforce your home, know what your risks are, know what to do in an evacuation. And there's a bunch of links to your town's resources. I always tell people document everything. Just take an hour, go through, take pictures, take videos of everything that's valuable in your house, go through these data sources, know where it's going to flood and what roads are going to flood, talk to your family members, come up with a plan for where you're going to go. There's a lot, but we don't want to be like Situate in 2018. If you see that, do not walk down the road. So during a storm, you know, subscribe to MEMA's emergency alert system. Barnstable County also has one. Talk to your family members as much as you can. If you do go and evacuate, don't come back if it looks like that. It might be a few days, so be prepared to be gone for about 3 to 5 days. And report power outages. I remember growing up, there was a tornado that went down my street and all of my neighbors, we were sitting there texting each other like, oh, did you report that to Duke Power Company? No, no one did. They didn't know we didn't have power. So never assume that your neighbor is going to do it. It's always better to just blow up Eversource and give them a bunch of calls. They love that. So if you do have any structural damage, I'm going to talk about flood insurance a little bit, but always get a permit before you do any kind of work. Even if you don't think you need a permit, it's better to just ask if you need a permit so you don't upset anybody at your town. Dispose of any debris. You know, fertilizers can be, you know, really toxic, and we don't want those, you know, going out into the marsh. Just talk to your town building code, the building department, and make sure that you're following all the regulations. I think, yeah, Brian, we had the same picture. So if you do live in a floodplain, I'm going to go through that a little bit, but just make sure you know like what that means for you. So if you have a mortgage and you live in a floodplain, you are required to purchase a flood insurance policy. Many of you probably paid for your homes a long time ago or paid in cash, and that might not apply to you, but it's just good to know like what you might be vulnerable to. Again, document your property. And if you have any questions about whether or not you live in a floodplain and what that might mean for you, I'm a certified floodplain manager, so I'd love to chat with you, and we can look up your home on the FEMA's Map Service Center. So switching gears a little bit, I talked about evacuating. This is a map of the regional shelters in Barnstable County. Keep in mind, going to a shelter is probably not plan A or plan B. It might not even be plan C. And it's definitely not a 5-star resort. It is cots. This is like, you know, Armageddon. Like, we just need a place to stay safe. They do allow pets. You just have to put your pet in a crate, but you can bring all of their food, and they are welcome at any of these locations. But you might be evacuating inland to a family members or to a hotel in Worcester. So just keep in mind and talk to your family about what your options might be. So another plug for the homeowner's handbook. About halfway through, there is a great resource of your go bag. So I encourage you all to take this list, go home and pack your go bag. There's different checklists for like at home, evacuating, going to a shelter. I think it's a good idea to like once a year, just kind of go through and make sure like your flashlight batteries are working, or, you know, the food's not expired, but it's just good to have this. So like something is coming, I can just pick it up and throw it in the car and not have to worry about where's my passport. There's a lot of other great resources in there towards the back of the book. Again, we worked really hard on this handbook, so huge plug for it. I'm happy to answer any more questions. Again, there's some structural. I can also talk to you guys about like buying an H3 clip and putting that in to, you know, help with resisting lateral loads. Okay, so I do talk of here. I told you I was coming back to flood insurance, the fun stuff. So this is from your coastline here. About 75% of all presidentially declared disasters do involve flooding. Like Brian said, Mother Nature is unpredictable and she doesn't like to follow lines on a map. So even if you live right outside, you might just want to look into a flood insurance policy. Most homeowners insurance policies do not cover flood damage. We saw that a lot in Asheville with Hurricane Helene, that people were filing for flood damage and weren't covered. So it's better to just know what's going on, because this is why flooding is really, really expensive. So lots of numbers up here. I can give you guys a second to digest that. A lot of what this means is that if you don't have a flood insurance policy and you try to get reimbursed from a disaster mitigation loan, it is a loan, like the $50,000, you have to pay it back, and it's not as much if you had a flood insurance premium to cover that. So lots of numbers. Again, Shannon Holst is our floodplain and community rating system coordinator. So if you have any questions about flood insurance, she is more than happy to answer them. And she's our boss, so please give her a call. Just a quick plug for the community rating system. You guys in Barnstable are currently in the application progress. Your town is working really hard. So essentially what this program entails is that your town is taking action to mitigate flood damages, and you guys benefit with discounts on flood insurance. So the town of Sandwich recently received a 20% discount. So all of their residents, if they have a flood insurance policy, get a 20% discount right off the bat. So that's a huge incentive to protect your home. And Shannon, since she started this program, has saved the Cape about $2.5 million. So it adds up. So talking about money, everybody always asks me what options are out there for me. And there's a lot. Oh, I'm tripping on something. And it can be really confusing. Most like HUD loans, NCRS loans, like they require a federal disaster declaration. But something that I'm getting a lot of questions about recently are flood mitigation assistance loans, where you can get federal dollars to elevate your home. If you have any questions about that, it is a very long process of reimbursement and FEMA and the town staff, but you could essentially get $200,000 to $300,000 from FEMA to elevate your home out of the floodplain. So if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to talk to you. Okay, one more thing. At the Cooperative Extension, we've been working with the Cape Cod Commission on a lot of projects with bylaws and regulations. So the commission has published their flood area design guidelines. That's linked in here. There's lots of historical considerations. I know in Osterville, we have a lot of historic structures, and we want to make sure that we tie in those different elements of the building. You know, if we are elevating them, that they're still an integral part of the community. We also recently published a set of resiliency bylaws and regulations for higher standards that are available on this website as well. We're hoping that this is like a blueprint that the towns can just pick and choose which ones they want to adopt. They can't adopt all of them. Hopefully they don't adopt none of them, but definitely take a look at those. Okay, so the last thing, I know we've thrown a lot at you guys. I want to leave you guys with some calls for action. So My Coast, like Brian mentioned, this is an app. You can download it on your phone. So Brian and I get deployed when there's storms coming, that we go out and document storm damage, and our reports are sent to the National Weather Service and to the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Office to help them make decisions about issuing weather warnings in the future. So if you guys want to do this, you're welcome to. Just be safe, please be safe. Don't go out, don't drive your car through 6 inches of flood water. But these are some pictures that maybe some of you in the audience have taken. And as you're going through the report, you can document, as you can see here, like the roads were impacted. What current response, like I was down in Falmouth and the DPW was responding. So you can put that in there as well. Here's another one from Yarmouth, but you can see how valuable these are. It'd be great if all of you guys could get a My Coast account. It's free. and just help us keep track of what's going on. You guys know the community a lot better than we do, and we have a lot more area to cover. Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you with is to take care of yourself. There's a link in here to our climate anxiety counseling that we did over the summer as part of our Cape Cod Coastal Resilience Week. Just a reminder that these things can be really stressful, and they can really take a toll on your mental health. And we want you guys to all be safe, but we want you to take care of yourself too, and take care of your community members first and foremost. And with that, let's not be like this in the winter. So, I think Bryan and I can take questions now. Yeah, go ahead.
With the rising temperature of the ocean, that also changing the currents. Yes.
That's something that we're still trying to dial in exactly what's going on, but, there are currents, some are slowing down, some of the overturning circulations that we're seeing kind of move all the water around. Those are starting to change, and it's, oh,
Sorry, I forgot that we were on Zoom too.
Sorry, Zoom. The question was about ocean currents and if they're changing with the changing temperatures. And the answer is yes. Not across the board, and exactly how much we're still trying to pin down for a lot of places, but they are seeing some change in, you know, some of the big currents that move a lot of the water around the oceans.
Two quick questions. One, the coastal regulations from 78, federal and state.
Those are state regulations. The Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act is just through the state. I'm not sure what there is at the federal level for that kind of thing.
About 2 weeks ago, the Globe had an article about what New York is doing with the potential new breakwater concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it really interesting, and wonder what Massachusetts might think of that, knowing that Massachusetts has pretty strict regulations about anything.
Yeah, so it really depends on what the project is. Big infrastructure projects like that, that especially pretty much anything underwater, you're gonna end up with the Army Corps of Engineers involved, and it's what Massachusetts as a whole would think of a project like that. I can't say, but those kinds of projects do have their place. They can be permitted, and there are ways to get them, you know, actually into the system. But they don't happen very often. And when they do, there is massive amounts of analysis, projections, all kinds of modeling that goes into those projects to make sure that we have the best idea possible of what that's going to mean in terms of sediment movement, habitat impacts, pretty much everything. So we try to predict the future. The problem is we're not always right, but we at least have a pretty good idea. Yes.
I just would add, we're trying to do some work, like some work in Falmouth. The first thing that they look at is eelgrass. And if you have any eelgrass, it almost like it's done. And I also have spoken to a number of communities that have received really millions of dollars in these large project grants. It takes, when you've got the Army Corps of Engineers involved, it takes about 10 years from starting to look at doing it to doing it. And it's very frustrating, and they have people involved that can stick with that and keep that process going in our communities is very tough. I will tell all of you, I have approached our new just elected senator. I said, this is ridiculous that all of us who are working on this are doing it town by town. We are just reaching for the stars here with very little guidance. And we're all repeating what each other is doing without any help. So I've asked him to help me put together a conference that is going to involve, at the very least, all the Cape communities that are coastal, it might even expand to be much wider than any Massachusetts coastal community. There, I mean, we have 72 miles of coastline in Falmouth alone. We're 7 of us who are volunteers that are working on this. It is insane that we're doing it. And so he has agreed to have me, and he's assigned me one of the people in his office, and please stay tuned, because we will be trying to put together a very big best practices, bringing in whatever experts we can get a hold of to say where this is going, what we could or couldn't do in the Commonwealth, and what we have to get changed at the state level to make that happen. And I'm sorry for taking all that time, but I do also have a question.
No.
Shut up. I just want to add to that real quick. A lot of what we do with public outreach is conferences. I know that's probably like very different getting a senator involved, but we're working with McCoy Bay National Estuary Research Reserve that they had it like years ago, the Cape Coastal Conference. That's going to be happening again sometime in the spring, but we're on there planning. So that will bring together people that should be talking that aren't talking. So stay tuned for that.
That would be great, and I wonder where they're gonna put that, because I'm telling you, we should have it in a big place where we all of us, beach committees, beach staff, coastal resiliency, DPWs, they all need to come because they're all involved in this.
Well, if anyone knows of a venue that wants to do this,
I'll help you.
That's who I am.
That's another time, the county does things there all the time, and can give you the big hall as you want, or a small hall if you want, everyone knows where it is. It's good for people coming from Boston or off Cape, it's a little bit of a hall, so people from Harwich or Provincetown. That's one option. Yes, out there.
Oh, yeah, I have been to a little comedy conference there. Sorry, go ahead with your question.
So I knew Matt about lowering the cost of flood insurance. You had a number of us who are in pending or in the works. And Sandwich and Ashby were already approved and in there. Tell me who is doing that, so I can go back to my town and say, why are you having me lose 20% savings because you didn't get your acts together and do it? I'm really serious. I'm looking at that and I know I just paid my bill.
Do you live in the town of Barnstable?
I live in Falmouth.
You live,
We're
okay.
also in Lightwood.
Yeah.
So I would like to know who I go and question on what happened that they didn't get going so that Mashpee and Sandwich are saving money and we're not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I had like a week or two ago, I had someone from the town of Barnstable come and say the exact same thing. They're like, why is Sandwich getting a 20% discount, not me? I don't know the answer, but Shannon, she's the community rating system coordinator for the Cape. You sent her an email. I don't know exactly what that application process looks like for Falmouth, but she is heavily involved in all of the towns and their recertification. But just like the actions that the town is taking alone, like I think are worthwhile, even if, you know, obviously the flood insurance incentives are great, but even if we weren't getting these discounts, like preserving open spaces, like these are things that, you know, we should be doing anyway.
Just to
So
put that in perspective.
Yeah.
If it's a 20% savings.
it's a big
and I
deal.
have a
Yeah.
Small bill. I know my $1,100 bill is small.
Yeah, it adds up. It
But
does.
that to me every year is $250.
Yeah.
And I wanna know, and you take that in our town of all the people that have flood insurance
Mhm.
and add that up. That is Falmouth, someone in the town
Yeah.
costing all of us
Yeah,
that much money
you should be
that could have
angry.
been spent in a better way.
I agree. And, you know, that's what I said. This program, since it started in 2014, has saved the Cape $2.5 million. So I wish I could give you an answer.
Well, I will find it.
But yeah, you find it and I'll talk to Shannon and let her know you're gonna reach out. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So I have a question that has to do with the regulatory definitions of the different elevations.
Okay,
So,
like on flood zones?
yes.
Okay.
And water, coastal wetlands regulations, the mean low water, mean high water, extreme high water.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of acronyms
So
out there.
Those are very important because they determine, first of all, where the private owner owns, and where they don't.
Mhm.
And people who own waterfront property typically in Massachusetts own to the mean low water line. And many property owners don't understand that that's a moving target.
Yeah.
But also with sea level rise, as I understand, the current way those heights are established, coastal zone, Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management maintains an online tool where you can go look at that data,
Mhm.
and they've done the work, map and the geography
Yeah, the
to
Massachusetts
then that
Coastal
you can go
Flood.
to any point and find out what the standards are, and if you're a surveyor, you can use that information to find those heights. But because of sea level rise, it's a moving target, and because they have to be determined by observation
Mhm.
of the actual sea level over 19 years, which is a lunar cycle that describes how the tides work. So they need 19 years of data, then they have to process and average that data. And then once they have all that data processed to where they think those heights were in that 19-year period, they have to adopt that as a regulation, which takes another 5 to 10 years. So by the time and then once those are adopted, they're good for the next 20 years. Which means at the beginning of the time they're adopted, they're based on the sea level 20 to 30 years ago. In the end of the time, it's a half a century old data that we're currently using.
I know, when you put
So-
it that way.
So in the past, 100 years ago, a half a century was a half a foot.
Mhm.
In the last half century, it's a foot. So the sea level, and we happen to be right now at the very end of one of those periods.
Mhm.
And we were supposed to have adopted the new 30-year-old data last year, but it's because of delays in the regulatory process, it's not going to be for another year and a half. So, but when we start with them, they're going to be 25, 30 years old. And when we're done using them, it's going to be 50-year-old data, but by then it'd be more than a foot. And at the slopes of a beach, that could be 100 feet of someone's waterfront. So, my question is there any thought about, are the people like you doing slightly a cut above your average resident who are involved in this at a governmental level? Are you giving any feedback to the people like at NOAA who set these standards? That, maybe we need a new process, a new methodology for determining those heights.
Yeah, I can try to take a first stab at least from like what we're doing here is, again, these bylaws, the Cape Cod Commission, that we understand things on the state and federal level take a long time. So that's why we wanted Cape Cod to lead the pack here, and we develop these higher resiliency standards regulations so that instead of waiting for the state to tell them what to do, that the towns could set their own higher standards of building 3 feet above mean high water, the base flood elevation. So at least I'll just speak on the Cape Cod, like we're trying to maybe circumvent that and be the leaders in the charge here. So go ahead, Bryan.
So I will say part of the problem with changing how we approach, so what you're talking about is the National Tidal Data Mepic,
Yes.
which is the 19-year period of the lunar cycle. And that ties into how we approach kind of the science side of it. And you're right, this data becomes, the current tidal epoch is from 1983 to 2002, 2001. So yeah, our tidal datums are way out of sync. And the newest one that is going up until 2020 isn't going to come out until 2026. And so you're right, as soon as we have these in place, the data is old. But part of the problem is we have to approach these kinds of things with a set methodology so that it's kind of even across the board. And that is the best way to find the tidal epoch. Now, that isn't to say that it is the best way to implement that into the regulations. I'm not sure if anybody at NOAA is proposing a new approach to applying that tidal epic, especially because with the acceleration of sea level rise, it is going to change faster. It's going to change more. But incorporating the full tidal cycle that is gone through, you know, all of the orbital physics that's involved, that is really tough, especially because with other changes through large scale erosion, formation of, you know, different land masses, obviously Sandy Neck, Monomoy, those didn't form in 20 years, but you know, if you go out to Chatham and you see the inlets, how those change so rapidly, that's a good way to think about how these things are going through their different stages over time. And so to get accurate data, we really want to have that wide time scale. But you make a very good point in that, you know, how we approach it regulatorily may not be adequate for what we're doing in the future. And as of right now, I'm not sure of any efforts, but that is something that I'd be happy to look into and get back to you on and see what's out there.
Yeah, but just a little follow on, I'll try to make it agree.
Yep.
I agree with everything you said, which is what led to my question, which is, it's a real physical math problem. It has to be solved and it has to be interfaced with. But if you could demonstrate, for example, that the current methodology gives you an error by a certain amount, and a different methodology, for example, taking the last two tidal dates and extrapolating them forward based on the different and demonstrate that the error is 50% less if you do that than it currently is with our current method. Then that's something that maybe could be done at the NOAA level and the different reason it's important to do it at the national level is that it doesn't make sense for every little village in town to try to figure out how to adjust that. And we were talking about regulations that go to court, get contested. If NOAA says this is more accurate way to do it, and we're going to set this national standard, then that's going to work. And the problem is, yes, it's a real physical problem, but when you go to the salt marsh and the obvious extreme high water, which you can see where the vegetation changes, is 20 feet different from where the surveyor put down his stakes, marking that according to the regulatory standard. That's a problem for local conservation.
Yeah,
So,
I think,
I'll just stop.
maybe,
I don't-
yeah, no, you're giving me some ideas. It's sort of part of our work at Sea Grant. So Sea Grant is part of a, national network. We're funded through NOAA. There's 34 programs in all of the Great Lakes and coastal states, and about like half of our funding goes out into the community to fund research projects. So that actually sounds like a great research project for maybe a PhD student or another researcher. So if you know anyone that wants some funding, our request for proposals is going to be going out in the spring, and I think that would be, aligned with our research priorities. So, gentleman in the back.
I was heating, air conditioning, and hash rate would have 10-year averages. Every year, they drop the oldest, add the newest, have a new 10-year. So it's a gradual increase, but it was always 10 years. Why can't they do the same instead of waiting for the night? Because to me, the cycle in the first year should be the same as the year 20. And why can't they just drop? Because it's going to be the same part of the cycle.
So a big problem with that methodology is that the way they do it now takes a lot of data verification. It takes a lot of QA, QC, making sure that things are what they should be. And there's a reason why the newest tidal epic is only going to 2020 and it's coming out in 2026. That is because it's not a local thing. This is for the entire country.
Yeah.
And it's tidal data from all kinds of tide gauges all around everywhere. And so to do it accurately and correctly, it takes a lot of effort on the part of NOAA to make sure that they are doing it with this set methodology to make everything even across the board for everybody. So the problem is it's just too much work.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question and then the two of us will be up here, then if you guys want to chat, go ahead.
So